So let's begin. This is our fourth class on chapter Chaf, in chapter 20, Tanya. We are discussing the mashal. Oh, welcome back. How are you? Good to see you.
On the other side of the room.
Yeah. Always trying to make things new. So we're in the middle of a discussion about the mashal that the Alter Rebbe gives here regarding a word of speech. And in particular, we compared this one word of speech compared to all the words that I've been talking about, all the words that I can say, all the words that I have said. Then we compared it to thought. And then, we went all the way back into comparing it to a neshama level, to the soul level. And what we said over there was that as much as we have to say with regards to speech, obviously there are letters of speech, thought, there's letters of speech in the thought, but when you get to the soul level, it's very hard to say that there are actually letters. And we said that there really, in fact, we can't say that there are letters there. So in comparison to that, not only is it a purely quantitative comparison, but also it is a qualitative comparison, but not just a qualitative comparison like we'd had with regards to thought, where we were talking about that thought does have letters of speech to it. But here we have to say that it is a qualitative comparison in terms of literally the essence of the soul, and in particular, we're talking about the source for all of these thoughts and all of these words of speech. So let's pick up. Let's pick up with something that we said yesterday, and we'll just run through forward to the end of the chapter. Let's start halfway down the page. It's on the last letters on the left side of the page of Chavav. Va'alef tzadik, right? Ve'ein tzarich leimar. Right, this is where we left off. We actually spoke about this yesterday, that we're talking about the Eser Kaichos, the 10 powers of the soul. And he says like this, Ve'ein tzarich lomar legabe mahus va'atzmas hanefesh. And obviously this includes a comparison of this relationship between that one word of speech that I said yesterday, when I said the word da. Now it's 24 hours ago, right? In comparison to the essence of the soul itself. Now over here, as I mentioned yesterday, we're talking about the essence of the soul being the 10 powers of the soul. Shehein eser b'chinosecha hanal, chabad, etc. Chulu. Namely, these are the, the 10 powers, starting with the three intellectual powers, Chachma, Bina, and Das, and of course the emotional attributes as well. So then he says, Shemehen nimshachu oisios hamachshava zu, because this is really the source for the thought that I had. Hamulubshos bedibur, which is enclosed within speech, which is actually expressed in this word of speech. Kishmidaber, when a person speaks. Why? Because you have to say that we know that obviously speech is characterized by letters of speech, but also thought is also characterized by letters, even though they are much more dakos, much more refined, much more edel, but you have to say that there are letters there as well. The only difference is, as we said yesterday, that they are spiritual and they're more refined. Aval eser bechinos chabad and chagas and nehi and malchus. However, all the other 10 kaichas, the 10 kaichas of the soul, the actual soul itself, when we're talking about that, right? Hein shoyrish v'makar machshava. This is actually the root and the source of the thought that is going into my mind. Ve'ein bahem oisios adayin. You cannot say about the soul itself that it has letters of speech in it. Koydem shemislabshus b'levush machshava, prior to it going into the machshava. Now, what are we talking about? Let's explain. L'mashal. Kashenayflos ezo ava v'chemda b'libo shel adam. Koydem sha'oyle mehalev el hamayach. Lichshav l'harba. Ein ba b'chinas oisios adayin. Rak chofetz pashut v'chashicha b'lev el hadavar ahu hanechmad etzlo. So he says like this. Where do literally the words of speech come from? We know that the words that I say come from my thoughts. Well, what about my thoughts? Where are they coming from? What happens is, according to what the Alter Rebbe is saying here, is that I cannot identify myself with my thoughts. In other words, my thoughts are not me. My words are not me. These are garments of me. right? So many people often explain about themselves, just mitzad a avodah point of view, that they get really involved in the thoughts that are pounding around in their head, and they begin to identify themselves with what? With their thoughts, right? The thoughts of this idea and that idea and all different things. But if you will go backwards, we have to see, where is that thought in fact coming from? The thought in fact is coming from my soul itself. My soul has a desire, for example, for whatever it happens to be. That desire is not coming from a thought. That desire is coming from me, from my soul. That desire is then pushing out to create a thought, and then that thought is pushing out to create a word of speech. And then, presumably, that goes out and it creates an action. So, for example, a person has a desire all of a sudden to eat ice cream. Let's use a very mundane example, and something that we could all connect to, right? Where did it come from? It came from inside of him, right? So it's there. All of a sudden it bounces up into his mind, this idea, this thought, I want to eat ice cream. But where did the thought come from? The thought came from inside of me. It expressed itself, it came out as a thought, and now my thought starts to take over. Okay, what kind of ice cream do I want? What type of brand do I want? What flavor do I want? Where am I going to get? And it starts to think through, how am I going to get this ice cream? I'm going to go to this store or that store. I'm going to go, buy it, or maybe I have it in the refrigerator. Let me just walk over to the refrigerator. Did I eat fleshik before? Is it milchik? Is it a par of ice cream? All these thoughts that now all of a sudden, right, were generated by that one urge that came from inside of me, that ice cream. Right? Ice cream is where it's at. Then a bunch of words might come out from this. Where do the words come? I asked my mother, did you buy ice cream? Is there ice cream in the freezer? Do we have it? Can I eat it? Or are you saving it for Shabbos? Or maybe words of, to my friends, hey, let's go to wherever, to the local ice cream store and let's get a cone of ice cream. Or, I start speaking about whatever, how am I going to get this ice cream? Where am I going to go? Let's go. We start talking about it. Oh, I like vanilla. Oh, you like chocolate? Okay, that's great, And then it comes out an action from this whole thing. What's the action? The action is going to my shelf, grabbing my keys, and going to the car, turning on the car, and starting to drive to the store to buy ice cream. All this, all generated from my soul. When it pushed out that initial desire, that feeling that I want to have ice cream, or that ice cream is good, or ice cream is good for me, right? When it was in my soul, though, you can't say that there were actually letters of speech there. It was more of a tendency that this is what I want to be doing, this is the energy that I'm going in. So now, let's go back and read it carefully inside what the Alter Rebbe says. L'mashal, for example, when all of a sudden it falls into me, some sort of love or some sort of desire, a wanting in my heart, shel adam, of the person, prior to it going from the heart up into the brain. Why would it go up into the brain? To start thinking about it and to start trying to figure out, how am I going to get this, whatever this thing is. So while it was still in my heart, before it went up into my brain, you can't say that there are letters of speech there. It's more of an energy than anything else. And the energy is, ice cream. It's all about ice cream. Pashut, it's a simple desire, v'chashika b'leiv, and a strong will, a strong, like a pulling of the heart for this thing, whatever it happens to be. Ela davarahu, to this particular thing. Hanechmad, which I have defined as being nechmad. Nechmad means it's nice, it's a good thing, it's a pleasant thing. It's a pleasant thing, etzlo, by him. Now, by me, ice cream might be interesting. By you, you might think ice cream is not interesting. I like Coca-Cola. Ice cream I don't like. Or I need a drink right now. Or I want to read a book. Or I want to, whatever it happens to be. So this particular desire is a desire by me right now. But that is not exclusionary, and it doesn't have to be that anyone else has the same feelings that I'm having right now, right? Now, but kol shekain kodim shenafla hatayva v'chemda belivo la'osa davar. Now, let's take it a step back even further. Why did it go into my heart? Presumably, I had an experience one time before, at least, that I tasted ice cream. So, therefore, in my mind, right, I said to myself, ice cream is good. It's a good thing. I like it. It's something interesting. It's something that I enjoy eating. It's something that I get pleasure from. It's something that, right? If I would have never eaten ice cream in my life, chances are I wouldn't have that coming up into my heart. Let's eat ice cream. Actually, it reminds me one time during Kinas HaShluchim, so I think it was the head shliach in Colombia, South America, he was speaking. This is probably going back about 23 or 24 years. And he was saying about how his kids, when they went to, it must have been his parents' house or his in-laws' house in Crown Heights, and they were served for dessert ice cream. And they just had never, ever seen ice cream before in their life. And they tasted it and they said, Bubby, I think it wasn't cooked enough, right? I think you're supposed to, the oven didn't go on or whatever. But Pashut never experienced it before. In Colombia, South America, 25 years ago, chances are you're not going to find kosher ice cream, right? That's the way it goes. So what we're seeing, what we have here is that there is some sort of memory in my mind, some sort of intellect in my mind that is saying to me that ice cream is good. Masha Enkein, let's say that I do not like, what's another food item that I maybe don't like? Brussels sprouts, okay. Let's say I had once Brussels sprouts, right, and I didn't like it, and I didn't like the taste, I didn't like the texture, I didn't like, it made me grow, it's disgusting. So because I have that piece of information in me, it's not a thought, it's intellect. There's a difference between intellect and thought, right? It's not a thought that I'm having. It's a piece of information that has been hardwired now into my computer, that Brussels sprouts are not good for me, right? So now that is not going to fall into my heart all of a sudden and say, hey, let's go to the store and buy Brussels sprouts. Now, it could be that you could change. It's very hard to change your subconscious and your what's happening in your brain, but it's possible. But let's say that you read a whole report on Brussels sprouts and how they are the best thing that ever happened since sliced bread, and it'll make you so healthy, and it's worth the disgusting taste or whatever, because it's going to make you live an extra 150 years or whatever. I don't know, right? Now all of a sudden you have conflicting pieces of information in your brain, right, in your intellect. And you have to start working it out, what's going to be. Okay? But that's for a different conversation for another time. All we're doing here is we're still translating, we're still comparing that one word that I said 24 hours ago and 24 and a half, hours and 30 minutes or whatever it was now, right? All the way, not just to thought, not just to speech, not just to thought, but even not just to the emotions that I have in my heart, but now we're taking it all the way up into the brain, into not the brain and the physical brain, but the soul, the intellectual aspects of my soul. Okay? Right? So he says, because then at that point I have in my chachma, sichlo, which is presumably bina, vidia, so and my das, right? Shehaya noida etzlo, that it was known by him, oiso davar shehu nechmad v'naim v'toy v'yafe, that this particular thing is very pleasant and good and positive and wonderful, right? Lahasigo, to reach for it. Lahasig literally means to, it usually is used in an intellectual point of view, to understand it, to grasp it, but it also means to reach towards something, v'lidabek, and to cleave to this thing. So it has been somehow, shall we say, it's been programmed into my intellect, somewhere along the line of my life, that ice cream is good for me. Right? Tobacco, smoking cigarettes is bad for me. Right? And I programmed that in, and now we're comparing it all the way back up into my intellect of my soul, and that's where we're comparing it to. Kagon, and now he gives examples. Lilmod is a chachma, for example, to learn a particular intellect. Right? He's doing a little bit of a more refined idea here that I want to learn all about Hasidus. Right? So this became somehow programmed into all of the brains of everyone that we have here in this room, and that's why you wound up eventually coming to yeshiva. Otherwise, it would not have brought you here. Right? Somewhere along the line, it became programmed in that this is a good thing. Now, a matter of how good it is, right? Well, it depends. What else are you doing, right? Is it worth spending my time? Am I going to take time off from school? Am I going to take time off from work? Am I going to do it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? It was programmed into your mind. You programmed it. Someone else programmed it. Somehow it was programmed it. God programmed it, right? That Hasidus is good. I want to learn Hasidus. I want to learn Torah. It's worth it to come to yeshiva. Oh, le'achol ezamachal arev, as we were talking about ice cream, or to eat some sort of, sweet tasting food. Next page, rak la'acher shekfar nafla achemda v'taiba belibo b'kaya chachmasa b'sichla b'yidiasa v'achar chazer v'alsam alev l'mayach lichsho v'lahar ba. So he's giving the direction of how things work. So what happens? So we have it first in our intellect, first and foremost in our intellect. Then it goes down into our emotions. Right? From our emotions, it bounces back up into our brain to start thinking about it. But now we're talking about the garment of thought. We're not talking about intellect. It's a different thing. Right? The garment of thought is much easier to take on and put on and take off. Because now we're talking about a garment. We're not talking about the actual computer itself, so to speak. Right? Then it goes down finally into the words of my speech, and that's where we're holding, because we were comparing the word of speech going all the way back up into the intellect of my soul. Now, with that in mind, right, since we know that the word that came out yesterday, 24 hours and 35 minutes ago, initially came from the intellect of my soul, we can now turn around and compare and to say, how does this word really, if we trace it all the way back into the intellect of my soul, does it really even exist? And the answer would be, it is completely nullified out of its existence to its source, which is the intellect of my soul. All right? And that is the example that we're giving in terms of the words of speech which are creating the existence that we have in this world. Let's see it inside. Right, because it came back into, now we're just going back through the directions, right? Shkvar nafla, let's start again from the top of the page. Shkvar nafla, after it fell, this chemda v'taiva, this desire, belibo into my heart, b'koyach chachmasa, with the power of my intellect, v'sichlo v'yediasa, my chachma, bina and das, v'acharkach, right? And you could obviously take each one of those things and we could discuss it, right? How did it go literally into my heart? It had to have come into my heart because it initially was a spark of information in my chachma, and then my bina is what really delved and went into all the details of why this thing is good for me, right, into my intellect, then into my bina. I had to then have been in a state of das, which means the focus. It acted as a bridge between my intellect and enabled it to go into my emotions, which caused it then to come into my heart, which means that now I'm feeling it in my heart, feeling it in my emotions, that this is something that is good for me, and therefore I want to cleave to it. That's what he says here. Right? Then it goes, then it goes up from my heart, back up to my brain, to now think about it, right? That I should have in my brain, how am I going to get this thing? In other words, take it from potentiality into actuality, right? Because right now it's just, I want to eat ice cream, but in order to get that ice cream, I have to do something. Either I have to walk over to the freezer and say, Baruch Hashem, there's still ice cream left and no one else ate it, or I have to say, okay, I'm willing, I have enough of a desire for this, I'm going to go take the keys to the car, jump in the car, drive over to ShopRite and buy the ice cream there. Lahasig hama'achal, right, to be able to grasp onto that, to actually obtain that food, or to actually try to actually learn that piece of information that I really want to learn, i.e., I now give up my time in school, and I say I'm going to go and spend a few days in yeshiva, right? That requires this whole process to take place in order that I could finally get it out into actuality. Hare mikan nolda bechinas oisios b'moicho. Over here now, while it's in my brain, while it's in my thinking self, I give birth to the letters of speech, shehein oisios koloshen am ba'am, which winds up becoming the letters of speech for every nation according to their particular language, whether it's French or English or German or Italian or Spanish or whatever language you're going to speak, right? Now it's going to come out in that way, and if I say, pass me the ice cream, let me go get it, right? And I speak it out. Which people speak about with regards to all the different things that are taking place in the world that we know, right? So now we've seen how we can compare those words that I spoke 24 hours and 45 minutes ago yesterday in comparison to going all the way up the ladder, and we see how it is completely absolved, it's completely nullified out of its existence when we compare it to the initial place from which it came. And that's what we're talking about here, of finding that word of speech in the actual source. Okay, Mir Hashem, after Shavuos, we'll continue with chapter 21, which is a continuation of this discussion and a development of this mashal. God willing. Everyone should, God willing, receive the Torah b'simcha and b'pnimius. God willing. Okay. Amen. That's it for today.